I recognize your face from somewhere.
That's not always a good thing.
It's true.
Can I just get in and out of here without somebody stopping and asking me about something?
All right, it's 5 p.m. It is time for Nacogdoches Planning and Zoning on November 12th, 2018. I call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes from October 8th, 2018 regular session. Is there a motion?
Also move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried. Second item on the agenda is a public hearing to be held to consider request and take action for a zone change from A1 agriculture to I2 heavy industrial for a portion of the property approximately 7.1 acres described as lots 1A and 4A, city block 75, property ID 26248, generally located at 2722 Durst Street. Mr. Manti, welcome.
Good evening. The case before us tonight, it's a rezoning from AG, which is agricultural zoning, to I2. I2 is the heavy industrial zoning. The applicant is planning on rezoning this property to enable him have, Jerry, let me have the other one, if you don't mind. Okay.
Jerry, or Mr. Manti, is there any way we can turn the volume up for the audience?
It's all right. Okay, I guess I will try to speak louder. Okay. So this is a rezoning from AG to I2, which is the heavy industrial zoning. And the applicant is rezoning this property to enabling him have what we describe in our zoning ordinance as a stone, sand, gravel, or earth sales and garage. So basically, to break or disintegrate rocks into sand and stone, and then they store it, and then to be sold out to third parties later on. It's a 7.1 acre property and is zoned agricultural currently. The I2 zone allows for this property to have that use that they want to put on site. On the map now, I have the location view showing the entire property. As you can see on the map, about 0.8 acres is cut out because there's a residence on site. But since that is not part of the rezoning, I will not go much into details on that. The other portion, which is about 7 acres, is the one that we are considering tonight. I have an aerial showing the entire property. It's wooded, just that we have the house in front. And like I said earlier, this house is not part of the rezoning, and so I will not place much emphasis on it. To the north of the property, it's vacant. To the south, we have it's a medical use. The Nacogdoches County EMS service is located right on the south of this property. On the east side, we have some residences as you drive towards the east into the city. And on the west, we have the sandstone use. We have the same use that the applicant is proposing. So on the east side, on the west side of this property, we already have an existing use, which is the same use that the applicant is proposing to have on site. The area is in close proximity to the loop, but as you drive on their street towards the city, you realize that it's made up of residential, a little bit of commercial, but most of the tracks along this street is residential use, and therefore staff believes that rezoning this to I2 for the intended use would increase the proposed use on site, and staff believe that it will likely have impacts on the residential uses along the street. Like I mentioned, if you look on the map on the west side of it, we already have a stone and sand activity going on there. So rezoning this to I2 would increase that use. And staff believes that their street has primarily become a residential use, and so allowing such a use would probably have an impact on the surrounding residences. I'll go ahead to the zoning map. It is zone ag. Currently, to the south is R4, which is a multifamily and some business zonings. To the east, we have an agricultural use as well. And to the west, we have the I2, which is the heavy industrial. So both the northern side and the western side of this property is zoned as I2. So technically, it will not be a spot zoning, but staff believes that rezoning to I2 with the intended use is what our issue is for tonight. I'll go to the future land use map. Future land use designate the area, with 15% being in the commercial zone, with the rest being vacant. And the 2003 comprehensive plan left some parcels vacant that they would develop based on the future trends. So the future trends along their street currently, it's more of residential. So ideally, we would want to see this being a residential use, or even if it's an industrial use, a use that will be of less intensity or will have less adverse impact on the surrounding uses on their street. Therefore, staff believes that this will not be in line with the future land use plan. We'll go back to the vision of the Nacogdoches comprehensive plan, which states that Nacogdoches is the oldest town in Texas, appreciates and protects its historical, natural, and cultural character. It promotes a healthy living environment and enjoys future growth and prosperity. If this is the vision for the city, and we have a lot of residences on their street, allowing a rezoning to allow a use that would have a likely impact on residential will not be in line with what the comprehensive plan calls for. Future land, there's no floodplain map because no part of this property lies in the floodplain. I'll go ahead to site photos. As you can see on the screen, is the house on site. It's not part of the rezoning, and so it will cause for no worry to even discuss it. Notification, we send out letters to people who live within 200 feet. We haven't received any in opposition. We haven't received any in favor. So we went ahead and did some basic analysis. Well, this is what we call a dust length map. Per planning regulations that we've seen in other places, once you decide to have a stone, sand, quarry business for sales and storage, the impacts on residences extend up to 0.3 miles. So basically, the current use on the site on the west is having an impact all the way to 0.3. Therefore, staff is of a concern that if we allow the same use next door, it is still going to extend to these properties. So as you can see on the map, every property within this buffer will likely be impacted by the use of the site. Once again, there's a current use on the west. We haven't had any complaint from residences living on site. But regardless, as a planning department, we don't look at just properties within. We also look at the environmental factors, we look at social factors, and anything that would ensure quality of life for citizens. So this is a map showing that if there's a sandstone business on site, the extent that this impact can have is all the way 0.3 miles. Let me go now to staff recommendations. I have some pictures on site. This is the side view of the property. The north, it's vacant all the way to the north. I have a picture here showing the south, which is the EMS. On the east, we have residences. On the west, it's the same kind of business on the west. I have some pictures here showing the activities on their street as you move into the city. And as you can see in the photos, it's all residential. So staff, this is what we found out. We find out that the subject property has surrounding industrial zones, and as such, the property, if zoned, will not be a spot zoning, which staff duly agrees. And I also want to put on the fact that in most of the time, most planning professionals will treat zoning in isolation. But I don't think zoning should be treated in isolation because in every zoning district, there are certain allowed uses. So we are not treating this zoning in isolation just as an industrial use. We are also looking at what kind of use is going to be in that zoning and what is the purpose of this rezoning. It is also important to note that there's an existing use of the same nature to the west of this property. This rezoning, if approved, would likely increase the adverse impact on residential uses along this street. Some other enclosed industrial or commercial land use with less impact would be a better fit. So since this is not it's not a spot zoning, staff is advocating that if any industrial use should be on site, considering the fact that it's in close proximity to residents, an enclosed industrial use would have probably have a less impact on surrounding residential uses. Staff believes that stone, sand, gravel, or earth sales and storage would have a detrimental effect on the neighborhood. There's already one in use adjacent to the property, and staff believes the proposed industrial use in a residential neighborhood will increase existing negative environmental impact, such as increased air and sound pollution, and reduce the surrounding neighborhood quality. And I think I showed a dust map that if anybody who lives within 0.3 miles from this property would have impact based on the use that is being requested. So based on the above findings, staff believes this is not a spot zoning. We just feel that looking at the dynamics of the area and looking at the current trends of development along their street, this rezoning and its intended use will not be good for the neighborhood, and therefore we recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission does not recommend approval to the City Council. Once again, it's not a spot zoning. We just feel the use will likely not have a good impact on surrounding residential uses. This brings my presentation to an end, and I'll be willing to answer any questions the Commission has.
Thank you. So the existing sand quarry that's next door to it, have there been any problems or any issues brought up in the past regarding it?
No, we haven't had any issues. I believe based on the history, it's been there for over 20 years. It wasn't part of the city initially, so the city annexed it into the city limits. No questions, no issues. I've been here for almost a year. Nobody has called about it. But my professional training will just not. I don't have an issue with the development, but I always look at the impact of any non-residential development on residents. So even though we have not had any issues, I just believe that increasing the use on that site would have an adverse impact on surrounding users.
Okay. So on site, are they going to be mining sand, or are they going to be like crushing rock?
I think the applicant will be here and will be doing more, but I think it's to the best of our knowledge, it's going to be more of crushing and keeping sand and stones for people to come in. And one thing that we thought about was people coming in on site to pick up and load and all of those stuff. Of course, it's close to the loop, but once again, as you can see in the pictures, as you drive on their street, it's all residents. So we're also thinking about cars coming in and back. Right opposite this development is an EMS service, an ambulance service. There's residents around. So we are not receiving any complaints from the existing use. We just believe that increasing that use on sites might be something that we have to think about.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Manning.
You mentioned the future land use plan under the 2003, I think it is,
Yes,
comprehensive plan. Has that been updated since I-69 footprint was determined it was going to go up the loop?
We haven't updated that. It's in the talks. I think it has to do with so many factors, but it hasn't been updated yet. So it's honestly,
It may be a little too early to do that. I
yeah.
don't know. But I noticed the map on the future land use map.
Sure.
It has it's probably going to expand as far as the uses.
Yeah.
You know, but in your opinion, you think the commercial uses will encroach more toward these existing residential uses?
Based on hearsay, we know a lot of properties along the loop are going to be gone, and probably this development, I wouldn't say it's going to be affected, but based on the location, it's good if you access it from the loop. My only issue is it's just a little portion of this street that is being used for industrial use. The rest of their street has residences.
Okay.
That is the only thing I'm looking at. And once again, we haven't had any complaints from the development nearby. And
Right.
so if PNZ decides to approve it, I will not have any, scientific claim or any, physical evidence to show that people have been complaining about it. But I just plan for now, the future, and what is going to happen, and I consider the residences around. So,
In the, if this is, I understand that the plan for this lot is if it's approved to do this sand mining operation. But if, once that's, I mean, that's a finite resource, right? That's gonna be gone in 10 years maybe,
sure.
if that was done. At that point, you're gonna have a lot that's hopefully level with the lot next door, which has already been excavated, right?
Yeah, possible.
So, and I don't know what, you know, what's the plan right now to deal with that, what's kind of a large drop-off between the two lots?
Yeah,
It seems like that's not stable for building.
that's true.
I don't know if that's affected that lot or the marketability of it, but it's such a narrow piece, strip of land, I would assume that it affects how close you can build to your property line.
Sure. The applicant is here. I would let him answer that question because I don't know.
Well,
what-
I'm more
yeah.
concerned from a planning perspective.
Sure.
Because if we say no to this, you know, what is the use of the property? Because can you develop it as it is with that existing lot next door?
I think you raise a good point. But in planning, we do believe that every lot is developable.
Okay.
Regardless, it depends on how much you are willing to invest in it. I'm sure we've seen how people are now even building in the sea and all of those stuff. Every lot is developable, but we have to be economical. So you raise a good point on the terrain of the land. And coming into Nacogdoches, I've been well informed that most developments haven't really gone on because of the terrain of the land and all of those stuff. So I do agree. Having that use on site will probably level the land, but at the same time, I'm thinking of the increase of that use on site in relation to surrounding land uses. So whichever way, I think.
Possibly the applicant could come forward and
Sure.
and we can ask him some questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
Okay.
Is the applicant here?
Good evening. One, I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Manting for putting the packet together and getting this information to you guys so it could be considered. As the applicant,
Could you state your name for the record, please?
certainly, Miles Bradshaw.
Thank you.
I'm the applicant in that I'm also the prospective purchaser of this property. Also with us tonight is Miss Gloria Settle, who's the current owner of the property. And I can tell you that I think the way to look at this property is look at it in a long-term use as well as a practical use. As Mr. Depish said, something's going to have to be done with that property in order for it to have its highest and best use come to fruition. If you've driven by that property along the loop and looked at that sand cliff, it's 15 to 30 feet high right now. And our intent is to use the property value, which is in the sand, take the sand away, and then end up with a great piece of property that will coincide with the commercial property that's right next door to it, Mr. Cobb's property. And it appears pretty certain that his excavation is more or less complete. I don't know that for a fact, but you can see that his land is more or less level, street level. And so our intent is to get the sand out, use it for building pad sites around the city, which will be good for the city. I also have with me, I call him my dirt man because he's done a lot of dirt work for me over the years, a guy named Tody Duckett. Tody is here. He's going to be essentially the operator of getting the sand out and selling the sand. And the only reason we're here at all is because of the regulations that you have in place require that we get this particular use to do what we want to do with it, and what, in my opinion, is absolutely the best and highest use for that property. I can also tell you that the property slopes downward And if I, can you pull up the map, the plat of the, oh, sorry, of the 3 properties, just the plat.
Like the area.
One more, that shows all the properties. That's good right there. I can tell you that the property slopes downward toward the east lot. And so ultimately, when we're finished, we intend to slope it to some appropriate amount, depending on what things look like in 5 to 10 years when it's all finished.
So you're not gonna try not to leave a big cliff?
That's right.
Because that's pretty friable soil over there, I think. I mean, it'll let
Yeah.
loose, it looks like.
Yeah. And so, and it's not near as, I mean, the high point is on the west side of the property, not the east side of the property. It slopes downward, as I mentioned. I think it's also important to, while I appreciate what Mr. Manny says about residences being along Durst, they're pretty far away, number one. The 2 immediate properties to the east are similar tracts. They're 7 to 10 acre tracts that are long and narrow, just like this one, that have 1 house on them up near the street. And so I guess to call it a residential area that's going to be harmed by this activity just doesn't seem quite right to me, because this activity's been going on there for 20 years. In terms of the dust, I appreciate that. Tody has informed me that they'll have a water truck out there and they can control the dust. And they buy water from the city. So that's another good thing for the city. And as Mr. Depish pointed out, looking into the future, this is commercial property. It's to the north of it, it's already I-2, high industrial. To the west is already high industrial. Immediately across the street where the EMS is and kind of behind them is business, commercial. There are some office buildings there. And so 10 years from now, that's going to be a commercial piece of property, if we can get the sand off the backside of it, which is what we're trying to do. And so that's kind of the approach that we'd like to take with this, and we appreciate your to have an open mind and looking in the future of this thing. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'm curious, so you said that it seems the elevation drops down as you go east. Do you have any projection as to what cliff might be left, or if you could slope it or remediate that somehow?
I've walked the property, and based on that, I think it would, I mean, if you cut it right up to the property line, it'd probably be at the highest maybe 10 feet. And it actually slopes downward going back as well. Mm-hmm. So it would, might be 5 to 8 feet down the backside. So
the dust issue is a good issue, because I don't think if we were, considering the neighboring property today, we would probably be all in for a gravel or sand operation, given where things are right now. But since it pre-existed the city annexation, it's there, and I think it is important that we haven't heard any, unless there's someone in the crowd that has any objection to the dust. But there's no regulation or permit requirement that will require you to keep dust abatement, other than maybe being a nuisance to your neighbors. Is that right? Like there's no legal requirement for that.
that's correct, as far as I know, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Are you going to be doing any secondary processing, or are you just harvesting soil?
We're just harvesting the soil for building pad sites, and as far as I can tell, there's nothing else there but good sand that can be made for building sites. And we intend to keep the house as is, and kind of slope it back from the house, going back into what's left of the property, and basically redesignate about 0.9 acres there with the house.
This .9 is with the whole property, though. It's not a different property.
It's the same property. That's right. It's all that together is Miss Settle's property. That's right.
Any other questions? No? All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
This is a public hearing, so anybody wishing to speak for or against may come up to the podium now.
Hi, I'm Katie Hensley. I missed part of his speech, and I probably don't have any complaints, but I do have some questions, especially after we talked about a couple of things. He said that it sloped down towards town. I don't, some of those cliffs are like 20 to 30 feet tall, and over the years I've watched the trees fall off. So I would like to know, I own all of the property right next to him. There's 13 acres, and it goes as far back as that one.
Are you?
And there's 3 houses.
Are you referring to the lot one,
Block 65.
1B?
the block 65, right immediately east of
To
it?
the east, yes.
Okay.
And then another house, there's one house in the middle. There's two houses that are rent houses. There's another house, and they could not be here today, and then my house. So all this is residential, and it all goes all the way to the back. I don't think it slopes that much. I've lived there for 70 years, and I've walked all up in there, and I don't see how it slopes enough to where in the end, if he took all the dirt out, it would only be 10 feet tall. So that's what I was wondering, how close to the edge can he dig the dirt so that my property is not worthless? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yes,
I'd like to ask you a question. Have you noticed any adverse effects from the other sand
No,
quarry?
I bought lots of dirt from him. And he brings in lots of it and then redistributes it. You know, you kind of get used to the dump trucks and everything. So that's not really been a problem. And he's dug that hill down, and I haven't noticed the dust to be totally unbearable. So that's why I say I'm not really complaining. I'm just curious as to how, if they dig all that out, how's that going to increase my property values? If he's right up against the line and say, I want to sell it, and somebody wants to put a house back there, they're going to worry about their house. You know, totally falling off. Do you know how close you can dig to it before?
Okay. So the applicant just has to adhere to our setback regulations, which I believe will probably be just about 6 feet or 10 feet from the sides. So it isn't a huge.
Right, so that's not going to be very sturdy because there's lots of white sand over there, and that's very unstable.
I think that if there's a issue with a lack or a causational problem here with excavation on a neighboring lot, reducing support, lateral support on your lot, I think then that would require some sort of modification to the land to allow for that to happen, either a retaining wall or something. But
'Cause he's
I don't know if
saying
the
that
city
he can
has a
dig-
process for that.
Yeah, he's saying he could dig down 20 feet and it would only have a 10-foot cliff, and I don't, that's an awful lot of, I just can't see that, as much as I've walked up there, I can't see that.
Yeah, you know what
Yeah.
would help help us make a decision? Is there a topographic map available
I don't have
with elevation changes?
something that I could have brought out. I don't have it.
So, Mr. Defish, is what you're saying is if there is damage to her property, it would probably be required to be remediated?
I think so, but I think you'd have to work that out directly with your neighbor, is what I'm saying.
20 feet.
Yeah, and
He can only, he can. The setback is 20 feet from the side. So,
20 feet?
Yeah.
for excavation,
No,
purposes?
so it's
Okay.
going to be addressed as a use.
Right,
So he has 20 feet on both sides. So
Okay.
unless the applicant decides to go more than 20 feet.
So he can't excavate closer than 20 feet to the property line?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it
Is that
narrows
20
this by-
feet?
Narrows it by 40 feet, in other words, the whole lot.
Yes,
narrows by
20
40
feet on the sides.
On
So
each
that's
side.
untouched, in other words, right?
It's like a setback. Yeah.
But the other side wouldn't matter, cause it's,
Well, it's
well,
still gonna be
unless
20
Mr. Cobb.
Yeah, it's going to be 20 feet on
Yeah.
both sides. So
So we're gonna wind up with a
Then
20-foot
you- I was
wide
gonna
cliff?
say, then you're gonna have a 20-foot cliff over there with
See,
Cobb.
there are so normally with this kind of use, we would ideally want a specific use permit so that the applicant can outline the actual plan.
Yeah.
But the rezoning does not allow it. That is why I decided not to go for full approval, just so the applicant can actually tell the commission and citizens exactly what the plan is. I'm going to do it this way, do it that way before you make your final decision. If I had gone for straight approval, then we wouldn't be discussing all of this stuff. So just for the applicant to tell the citizens, I intend to do it 20 feet away, times of operation, this is what I'm going to do, dust control, noise control, and all of those stuff. That is why I didn't go for straight approval. And this is a very legitimate question too.
so you're saying this is like a loophole?
Yeah, because once you go for the zoning, then zoning doesn't have to be specific with what they want to do unless you guys ask the question. I can't bring all that in a zoning
Right.
request.
Well, even if we change the zoning on this, there has to be some sort of process for, like, if I were gonna go into my backyard and start digging, I would have to get something
There's a
approved,
permitting
no?
Process.
At the permitting process, you will just have to meet the setback requirements. If he plans to park on sites, meet the parking requirements and some basic stuff. But we cannot specifically tell him to move this to please citizens. No, this is the only time where the applicant to be allowed to actually tell the commission and citizens what his plan is.
Okay,
So,
okay.
So it sounds like we need a specific use permit here and not a zone change. Is
but
that?
but the zoning requirement does not stipulate that.
Yeah.
It just says straight rezoning. So, like I said, it's not a sport zoning. There are heavy industrial zones around it, but the complexity of the use, and let's not forget the fact that the existing use on site was annexed into the city. It is not something the city just allowed to go on.
So we've got the 20-foot setback on the sides. If it is approved, then can we go into a specific use to define how, like, there doesn't need to be a 20-foot setback on the western side of it, because that's gonna make a hazard.
And then that becomes a conditional zoning, which our ordinance does not allow us to do. It's either you, rezone or I don't rezone. And like I said, we haven't received any complaints or anything of that sort, but
But the owner could then apply for another variance,
to reduce the setback,
Yeah.
to increase the setback or reduce the setback.
reduce or eliminate. in this
Eli-
situation.
Elim-
Yeah,
eliminate
he can do a variance, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
But ma'am, to answer your question, the owner has to be 20 feet away from the sides. I don't know if that is enough.
I don't know how stable that's gonna make all of that, though. Cause like, if I wanted to sell the 13 acres for a subdivision, who's gonna want a house with a 20-foot, 30-foot cliff, 20 feet in their backyard? I mean, and like I say, it's mostly the white sand, which is very unstable. You get a hard rain and I just don't see that, the incline that he's saying, that he can take it down 20 feet and it'll be level. I think that's not feasible. Because, I mean, even 4 houses down, mine goes, up. So if he takes that one all the way down, then we're probably still gonna have at least a 20-foot cliff.
All right, looks like we've got a few other people that would like to
Oh,
speak,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then how's that gonna increase my value? I mean, he was saying that it would increase the value of my house. When-
Property value wise, I cannot say it will increase or decrease the property values because this is just a rezoning case, so we cannot be able to determine if it will increase or decrease property. So.
Okay, well, like I say, I have no problem with the business, but I don't want it to, something I've worked for years for my retirement, to make all that go to waste because the property's not worth anything.
I agree.
So, will somebody have an answer to that before we get done with it? I mean, is that,
call the owner
is
again,
that
Yeah,
after
we'll
that.
get some more people to
something else?
speak.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
The applicant had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to some of her
If you come on up, sir.
I think it'll increase her property. That sand's worth a lot of money, number one, but that's kind of beside the point of what I wanted to make, and that is, I was told that a specific use permit was not the right process to do what we wanted to do. And so that's why we brought it forth as a rezoning. If a specific use permit process will allow us to customize what we're doing and keep everybody happy, then let's go that route. And I would say if you're inclined to deny it, please allow us to do that. And certainly I would work with the neighbor to establish some kind of slope on that side of the property ahead of time. I mean, that's 7 acres. That's going to take us a while to dig all that. And we're not necessarily going to go, all the way to the very bottom, all the way across. I mean, that's just not realistic. So, anyway, I guess I would say if you're inclined to deny it, allow us to go through the specific use permit process, and we can bring a plan forward if that's that process.
Mr. Mandy could speak to this better. I don't believe us denying it precludes you from being able to apply for a specific use. Is that correct? Or?
For the kind of use he wants to do, it's only a rezoning. We don't have to let him do the specific use permit. It's just a rezoning issue. And it's rather for them, they have questions to this use, but he cannot do a specific use permit. He can only ask for a variance on the setback and all of those stuff, but
I see. Yeah.
like I said, it's not a sports zoning. The surrounding uses are all zoned heavy industrial. It's just that they are.
Is it because it's agricultural? Is that why a specific use permit is inapplicable?
Well, our zoning ordinance just states it to have what is it, I2.
Or
as a
what
rezoning.
about planned development? Or
That use would also not allow for a planned development. It has to either be a straight rezoning. So
And I would certainly have no issue with putting certain conditions on y'all's approval if that can be done, if I can maybe have time to come back and present exactly what it is I will do with the property and things that I'll do to prevent any issues that other folks may have, then I'd like the opportunity to do that, if that's a possibility.
yeah, I think the homeowner has a valid concern about the slope, and the remnant property. I think if somehow we could be assured that there was a slope that was going to prevent some catastrophic collapse, I think people would probably feel better about it. But
I would like to see a topographical map would be very beneficial, I think, in my eyes, to be able to see exactly what elevations we're talking about, what slopes we're talking about. Just, we're just kind of guessing, saying 20 feet, 10 feet. I mean,
Sure.
without knowing, I think that's kind of.
Yeah. Well, we also have the owner of the adjacent properties in here right now, and they've had the same issue for what,
Currently.
20, 30 years, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you'd like to say anything about the lateral support issue, or if you've had any problems with that, ma'am?
Sir, I inherit,
Inherited the property.
and state your name, please. I'm Gloria Settle. I inherited this property from my aunt, and to answer any
detailed questions, I probably couldn't, because I just inherited it in January of 17. To my knowledge, my aunt and my uncle and all, they never had any problems with the sand company on the side. They've never had any trees falling over or anything that I, a niece, knew about. I mean, I would say there's no big fear or scare if your property is like ours is now. When I inherited the property, there was a gentleman that came, I can't think of the company now, that surveyed it. And I told him, I said, when you're walking this cutoff from the sand company, would you be on the lookout to see if they dug into the side of our property? And he said that the Cobbs were very honest. They did not take any of the sand. And all I can say is we've not had any problems at all. And
So
that's-
let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Did the existing sand operation, did they maintain that 20-foot setback, or is that not applicable to them?
there's not any setback there. On their property, you're asking? No.
Yes, ma'am.
Probably because it
It's,
pre-existed
it's
zoning.
right on, it is on the, their stop, they stop on the property line. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I did know property owner all my life.
Katie,
Come on up to the mic, please.
Sorry.
Okay, I've known Maureen Crawford my whole life, and I always had to call her Aunt Maureen because that's how we were raised. And we had talked about the dirt falling off, and she said, oh, that's no problem because it's, way in the back. So it's never been a problem because right there beside her house wasn't very much. It was all back in her woods, and she hasn't been back there in years. So she didn't ever know. But I have watched the trees, gradually fall off through the years. So I don't know, like I say, I don't know how close they got to the line, but she didn't care.
Okay.
Because, it was back.
Thank you. I'd really like to see a topographic map and how that's going to be remediated, quite honestly. Because I am worried about damage to the adjacent properties. Anybody else like to speak for or against? Mr. Manny, any closing thoughts?
Well, like I said, the zoning ordinance allows for a rezoning, but if it's up to the commission to make a decision, approve or deny, or I don't know if you've ever tabled any application. I don't know what you've done in the past, but the only reason why I have brought it here is, once again, I want to stress on the fact that surrounding properties are zoned heavy industrial, but if this rezoning is approved, once it gets to the permitting stages, we cannot require anything from them apart from them following the basic setback requirements and parking and all of those stuff. So these are some of the questions that made me go into the not recommend approval. So it's up to the commission to make the final determination. If you want more information for us to bring this case back, fine, we can do that. We will not take another application fee from the applicant. We would just let him draw his plan for the rezoning and then present it as part of the application, so it doesn't become a conditional rezoning. So my recommendation will be based on what he has provided to me and stuff like that.
So I would make a motion that we table this till we see a topographic map and end-use slope.
Sure, or anything, or his work plan, or how he plans to site plan, or how he intends to carry the whole business. I mean, yeah. then we can do that. So
I'll second that.
Well, I think if this is done correctly, you can hopefully maximize, because right now you have this huge cliff of dirt that is not going anywhere.
great.
And so the only way to fix that now is to take out more dirt. So
Agreed.
if you do this correctly, you could do it in a way that doesn't offend the neighbor, but also maybe makes the rest of this land usable in the future.
Exactly.
Which I think would be ideal, but, you know.
Oh, we've got a session, I'm sorry, a second on the motion to table till we've got a topo remediation plan. All in favor? Raise your right hand. Motion carried. It's tabled till the data is received.
I think I'll work with the applicants. We can present it at the next meeting for next month if the applicant will be ready with such information.
Any questions, sir?
Is it possible to call a special meeting before December? I know the sellers are anxious to get this property either sold or not sold.
I think I will talk to our city attorney about it.
Okay.
If he thinks it's not a problem, then, and the commission would have the time to meet, then we can.
And I know the holiday coming up is
Sure.
gonna be a little tough, but maybe right after the holiday,
Yeah,
if possible.
okay.
All right.
Just said it during the Cowboys game. Nobody wants to watch that.
Okay, moving on.
We meet the first of the month.
We've got an additional public hearing to consider a request to take action for a zone change from agriculture to R4 multifamily residential for Lot 27, City Block 54, property ID 24696, generally located on Park Street.
Okay, so this is a rezoning from Ag to R4. The applicant plans to, it's a vacant piece of property. It's quite huge, about over probably 36 acres, and it's located along Park Street. Currently, it doesn't have any access directly from Park, but I believe the applicant owns some properties to the north of this property, and so they could always get access to this property from Park Street since they own the lots up there. Looking at the existing land use map, the northern side of this property is zone, it's residential and vacant, a mix of uses. To the south, it's all vacant land. The east of this property has some vacant and some residential uses. And then the western part of it also has some multi-family uses. The area, as you drive along Park Street, is made up of different varying housing choices. We have some duplexes on site. We have single-family homes, and we have some multi-family uses. So we believe this rezoning and the proposed uses allowed in that rezoning would not have any impact on surrounding land uses. If we look at the zoning map, it's zoned Ag. To the north of it is multi-family R4, which is the intended rezoning. To the south is two-family and Ag. To the east, two-family, and to the west of it is also R4. This will not be a spot zoning since we already have some R4 uses already surrounding this property. And so staff believes that the rezoning would have no impact uses on surrounding properties. And also, I also want to put in the fact that the proposed R4 use, the applicant hasn't really decided on what he wants to put on there, but the R4 uses allows for residences, it allows for duplexes, it allows for multifamily, and all of these uses are already existing in the neighborhood. So we believe this rezoning will not have any impact on surrounding zoning. Future land use map, it is currently a little portion of it is it's for, I believe, two-family or multi-family uses. The comprehensive plan do encourage infill development, which I believe this rezoning, if approved, would allow. We did have a meeting last week Thursday about with some stakeholders, and one of the discussion was to encourage infill development, which I believe this property would help us achieve that long-term goal of allowing for infill development within the city limit as opposed to seeing all new development going outside the city limits. And so I believe this rezoning is in line with the 2003 comprehensive plan. We don't have any floodplain map because no part of this property lies within the 100-year or 500-year floodplain. We did send out letters to property owners within 200 feet. Nobody responded in opposition and nobody responded in approval. I have a picture here showing a side view. It's wooded, it's vacant, with some patches of different housing choices surrounding it. To the north of this property, I have a picture here showing the street. I have a picture to the south, to the east, and to the west. And as you can see on there, we have some houses surrounding the property. Staff believes this zone change will be a good fit for the surrounding neighborhoods. There's no adverse impact to existing surrounding uses. And then there's also the possibility for varying residential development, which is encouraged by the 2003 comprehensive plan. We therefore believe that even though there's no residential works being planned now, if rezoned, it will not allow for any use that will be detrimental to what is already happening in the neighborhood. Staff therefore recommends approval of this rezoning from AG to R4. This brings my presentation to an end, and I'll be willing to answer any questions you may have.
How's this property going to be accessed from Park Street? Is there an easement across Lot 20 or?
Okay, so let me put this on the map. In discussion with the applicant, I believe they owe some the properties to the north, I'll say the northwestern part of the subject area, and that is where they intend to have their access from. I think it's big enough to construct any street. It's big enough to meet the street standard that we have in our ordinance. So
Okay.
that's the plan.
And there's no, if you put a bunch of multifamily homes in here, you're going to increase foot traffic too.
Sure.
But there's no requirement to put sidewalks in here if we do that, is there?
We currently don't have sidewalk requirement for residences, but we've always recommended, and I want to put on the fact that it's something that the city manager has instructed city staff to start working on. I don't know when the applicant intends to start developing, but we'll probably have a sidewalk ordinance by the time the applicant is ready to develop on site.
Utilities plan to that too, because that's a lot, 32 or 36 acres of multifamily, that's gonna be a lot of families, so what, do utilities plan to that factor?
We
Or
did
staff plan?
discuss all of that with the applicant to let him know the cost involved and all of those stuff. That is why he actually made it R4, just so that in case there's going to be cost involved in doing a multifamily, then they can always go for the single family route or duplex route. So yeah, instead of multifamily. So
I've got a question. If this is approved, and if in the future, so there's no codified easement or recorded easement
Sure.
for access to it. We could approve this now, and in the future, before you issue building permits, will you require him to record an easement for access, or?
There has to be an easement.
great. Before the applicant even plans on what he wants to put on there, he has to plat the entire lot and show not just easement but access as well. So yeah, he would have to do all of that before we even sit down to talk about what development he wants to put on site.
Okay,
The owner's daughter is present also.
okay, great,
She's back here.
okay.
I wasn't aware you could even purchase anything that was landlocked without an easement.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. Anybody wishing to speak for the applicant, come on up.
I'm actually her daughter. I'm Tammy Jones. She actually owns the 1.85 acres and the 8 acres
Is that-
adjacent
is
to
that-
it.
That makes sense.
I think it's to the north.
Is that the triangular shaped lot? Or
Yes.
is,
But I can't see that.
we need the,
Okay, yeah, lot 20 also is 8
Okay.
acres.
okay.
That makes sense.
All
Yes.
right.
Okay.
This,
And
Oh, she owns lot 20, block
Yeah.
50, okay.
Yes.
And it's, that one's already zoned two-family, correct? Lot 20, block 54?
Yes, yeah, it's zoned for R4.
This one is?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the colors are a little hard to see.
All right. Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, ma'am. Anybody wishing to speak for or against? If there's nobody that wishes to speak, I would make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried. And the next item on the agenda is staff updates from Mr. Leo Manti.
I believe the first one is the Scenic City certification. I did talk about it some months ago, that the city was in the process of applying for a Scenic City certification. The PowerPoint is a long one. I didn't want to, I didn't bring it along because I knew we had 2 other cases, but it's a certification whereby 15 organizations would access your city ordinance to verify, to access it and compare with other cities to see how you are doing. It's different levels. It's recognized, silver, gold, and platinum, and we got into the recognized. So that means there's more room for improvement. I want to stay on the fact that the city of Tyler, for example, wouldn't even qualify for recognized because of some of their ordinances. I've worked in the city of Wichita Falls. They've applied. They couldn't even get to the recognized level. So Nacogdoches, as old as it is, being able to get to that extent, I think it's a good thing.
What are some of the things that are triggering?
I think the major things they look at is billboards, landscaping, and then they look at the entire ordinance. But if you allow billboards within your city limits, that is an automatic no. And so that's one of the reasons why I believe Tyler wouldn't qualify to be on it. And I talked to the planning manager in Tyler, and he told me for a fact that they just wouldn't qualify. So it's not that everybody who applies gets to get a certification. It goes through a process. They look at your sidewalks, they look at utility lines, they look at the kind of signs you allow in your city and all of that. So recognized, I think we've done well, but it also tells us that we can do more moving forward. And I think city council, city manager, and everybody thinks there's more that we can do as a city moving forward.
Anything in particular?
One thing that I think would be great is our landscape ordinance, which I've already started working on. Currently, we allow landscaping for properties in the B1 and B2. That means if you decide to put a commercial use in an industrial zone, you are not required to do any landscaping. At the last city council meeting, I brought it to the city council to change that to allow for landscaping for every commercial development. City council also wants me to look at parking landscaping. Current ordinance says you can only do landscaping. You're only required to do landscaping on your parking lot if it's 200 parking spaces or more. A city like Nacogdoches, we don't have the potential to attract businesses that have 200 users or more currently. Maybe in the future, but currently, I think the maximum parking spaces we would have would be for a business like Walmart. And so we are looking at reducing that 200 requirement to something lower in order to see more beautiful parking lots as we move along. So recognized level, hopefully by the next time we apply, we should shoot for gold or platinum. So that is the plan. Okay.
Thank you.
And then the next one, we had a stakeholders development meeting. We met with realtors, banks, we met with building contractors and people who are involved in the development community in Nacogdoches. We had a NISD superintendent at the meeting as well, and basically we threw some questions out to them. What are their challenges in building or in developing Nacogdoches, and how the city can be of great help to them? A lot of things were discussed, but one of the major things that came in was the school district. People think the developers made us aware that people were building outside the city limits because they did not have confidence in the school district. And we had a superintendent here. I think positively there's a lot of work going on to improve this, and so we hope to see more development within the city. I posed the question of why are we not seeing infill development? They did answer that there wasn't a demand for it. People are not willing to live in those areas due to so many other issues. I think if you build outside the city limits, you have people buying your houses faster than building it in certain areas in Agodochis, and that was one of the reasons. So with regards to how we can partner with them, I think they mentioned the fact that there's a cost, the cost in developing in Agodochis within the city limits is higher than developing in the county. Infrastructure and all of those stuff. And at the meeting, I also made them aware of the fact that it doesn't mean that we have to reduce our standards, because our standards are based on safety, health, and so many other stuff. I think one of the key things was building a road in the city as compared to building a road in a subdivision outside the city limit. It's easier to do it in a county cost-wise than within the city limit. So we did look at all of those stuff. City staff will look at how best we can always reach out to them to see how we can partner with them and all of that. We had a city manager as well at the meeting. Some council members also came. So we are hoping that we can sit down again and find ways and means moving forward. And I would always start with the Planning and Zoning Commission if we start working on stuff like that. So that'll be all.
Thank you.
All right.
And that will adjourn this planning and zoning meeting for November 12th, 2018.